assessment for rock intertidal habitats. And what I want to do is I'm going to walk through a couple of things, these questions. First of all, when did we monitor? Just like Mark's group, we did our baseline characterization in 2007, 2008. And then I'm going to walk through some of these other questions. Where do we monitor? I think that most of you, I think you're mostly in state parks, you'll see your places in here. What do we monitor? Why do we monitor? And what do we predict? There's like a ghost here, Chris. So I'm going to walk you down from the north to the south. These are just regional maps. The blue dots here are going to be the reference sites, and the green dots are going to be the SMRs, the state marine reserves, or the state marine conservation area. And this is from Pigeon Point to Natural Bridges, and you can see that we have sites within each of them. It's a little bit difficult, but these are the state marine reserves and state marine conservation areas, and here's Natural Bridges and Island Nuevo. You can see that we have sites in both those state parks. And in fact, I think we hit most of the state parks as we move down the coast. This is from Moss Landing down to Soberanes, and again, there's some offshore sites that Rick's going to talk about just a bit. And then the Monterey Peninsula and through Lobos is covered with state marine reserves and state marine conservation areas. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of sites in those areas as well. Coming from Point Sur to Cayucas, again, there's a large number of them. Here, typically the offshore one is a conservation area. That's usually the locations where they're allowing some recreational and occasionally some commercial. And so there's a series of sites that go all the way down. You can see that we're up to 32 sites at this point. And then down to Vandenberg from Morro Bay and Point Vashon area here. This is Montana de Oro, around to the Vandenberg Reserve. And then this is going to be Point Arguello and Point Conception. And these are some of the reference sites there. So that covers, we've got 42 sites that we've been following, about half in and about half out. And we make comparisons between those to see whether there's been an effect, or we ultimately will see whether there's been an effect of the designation of the protection. And as you'll see at the end of what I'm going to talk about, there's a little bit of controversy about whether these things should have the same type of effect in intertidal areas, and for obvious reasons. So what do we monitor? We monitor size, structure of important local species, for example, abalone, sea star, urchins. We monitor the abundance and the cover of sessile species like mussels or sea palms, the community attributes like the biodiversity, and then some associated attributes that might actually affect the communities and populations that we see. Marine mammals and birds we sample, human use, geology, temperature, wave climate, all sorts of other things. Sand bureau is a big one. Why do we monitor? The key reason was to establish a baseline. It's very important to establish a baseline. Many of these sites have never been sampled before, or if they had been sampled, they've been sampled in very different ways, each of them, and so it's very difficult to make a uniform baseline from which to judge the effectiveness of designation and protection. And we want to see whether there's a benefit with respect to MPA protection, with respect to populations of harvested species, and very importantly, the structure and the function of the biological communities. Are they having an effect on the overall community that you have in a particular location? What do we predict? We have predictions in two ways, both in terms of populations and biological communities. Biological community prediction is pretty much, we want to have a community that is stable and has structure and function that provides benefit to the rest of the organisms in the community. With respect to populations, I'm going to show you some data here that we collected from Central Coast Reserves on a couple of species, and we hope that this is what will ultimately result from the designation of the new reserves. So this comes from, it will come up in a second. What this would have shown is populations of the giant limpet, which is harvested, and another species, sea stars, Physestrocracius, which is one of the things you see when you're out in the field, or out in the, I'm not sure what's going on, I think it's stuck here, but, and in both cases what we find, I can't get to the one I wanted to get to. Okay, but in both cases what you see is that limpet sizes and sea star sizes are much bigger in protected areas versus in non-protected areas. The key difference here, this is really what distinguishes what we're talking about, which are tidal areas, which is probably what most of you encounter on a daily basis. The key difference here is that the areas where we see the benefits of protection are those where there's actually, where there's not very many people. And so it's access more than protection, which is conferring the benefit. And you'll see, so one of the things that we are concerned about are these unforeseen consequences. And if the next slide will come up, then what you would have seen was the actual number of visitations to parks along the West Coast. And it's huge. I don't know what's going on here. This is the translation between a map and a PCA. And it's not very cool in the map. Anyway, the bottom line here is this, is that if you look at the usage along the West Coast, especially along Central California, there are massive numbers of people that are using the state parks in particular and all sorts of areas. So this is a picture I had with respect to the giant limpet, which is harvested in Kaiser. They're much bigger in reserve areas than they are publicly accessible areas. But that's not because of delineated legislative protection. That's because there's no one there. Those are areas where there might be really strong enforcement, but it's also areas where you just can't get to because they're off those private locations or they're deep into the Big Sur coastline. And so you do see a clear benefit when the access is restricted. Going through 2 more slides. And what I wanted to show finally was this relationship with people. If you look at Point Pinos, if you look at natural bridges, it's huge. If you look up at Año, if you look at the Fitzgerald, and you compare them to what people think are the big and heavily used areas down on the south coast, like Cabrillo, there's many more people that visit our seashores up here than there are in the south. And that's on a per 100-meter basis. Natural bridges gets 40,000 visitors per 100 meters shoreline. And what that means, and the one concern we have with respect to the designation of marine protected areas, is that will increase the usage, which we all want. We want people to come out and visit. And so my last point was really going to be that it's really up to you guys to educate the public about, and I know that you're doing it, but it's even more important now. As usage goes up, and the attractiveness of some of these areas, because they've got designation goes up, it's even more essential to educate them about good etiquette when you're visiting the ocean. Not just the open ocean, the subtidal areas, but where most people actually go visit the ocean, which is the seashore. And I'll leave it at that. We can take questions there.